Welcome back, students. This is Module 2.3.2, Cellular Energetics. This is really a handful of foundational concepts so that we can further understand cellular respiration. You'll recall last time we ended with this slide, two branches of metabolism that talked about catabolic reactions that release energy by breaking bonds and anabolic reactions that require energy because they form bonds. Today we want you to consider the two ways that energy may be released from something that has a lot of potential energy, whether it be a chemical or a substance like a can of gasoline. One way that you can release the energy in a can of gasoline is an explosive release in which all of the energy is simultaneously released. And this typically prevents the energy from being used to do anything productive, any productive work, because it's released simultaneously in such a large amount that it's virtually impossible to capture that energy. Here's a second way that energy can be released is in a stepwise manner in which small amounts of energy are released in a somewhat controlled manner, allowing that incrementally released energy to do useful work. Think of that same can of gasoline, instead of exploding, as being used in an internal combustion engine. And here's a depiction of an explosive release of energy. And with that explosive release of energy, the energy ends up as heat that is not harnessed. On the other hand, this is a depiction of a stepwise release of energy, such as what happens in cellular respiration, small chemical steps, and the energy can be harnessed to do some useful work. So we're talking about energy, and I want you to understand that the energy that drives life, that is consumed in cells, is primarily chemical energy in the form of a single molecule. And this molecule is ATP. When we introduced biological macromolecules to you, we mentioned ATP under the category of nucleic acids. And I told you that we'd return to it later, and I would at that time ask you to learn its name. And ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and I would like you to know that name for ATP. As I just stated, ATP belongs to the category of biological macromolecules known as nucleic acids. It includes DNA and RNA, but ATP is a little unique in that group in that it is used as the primary energy source within cells, while the others, not exclusively, there are some other energy-carrying molecules in the group of nucleic acids, but the ones we're going to learn, ATP is the only one that fulfills this role, while DNA and RNA carry genetic information. The fact that it's called adenosine triphosphate should imply to you, if being astute students as you are and using an etymological approach, you should recognize that triphosphate means three phosphates, and energy in ATP is stored in the phosphate bonds. Energy is released when a phosphate bond is cleaved or broken, and energy is required to put the bond back on. ATP is the energy currency of the cell, and it's vital to life as it powers cells. ATP is what drives things. Other food molecules have too much energy to be used in the routine energetics of the cell. It's too much. It's very much like trying to buy a pack of gum with a $1,000 bill at Circle K. ATP, on the other hand, is like the dollar bill. It's the currency. So there's glucose, the $1,000 bill, way too much energy. And there's ATP, more like the dollar bill. In point of fact, the entire ATP molecule probably has as much energy as is present in a glucose molecule. I haven't really compared those values, but I'm sure it's somewhat similar. But the fact is that ATP, here is the structure of ATP, and you can see that it's a large molecule. But the reason that ATP is so optimal for the function it fulfills is because instead of breaking all the bonds, we only break the phosphate bonds out here and releasing a little bit of energy. So that's why ATP is able to fulfill that role. Now, there are some consequences of the structure of ATP. Energy is released when a phosphate group is cleaved or broken off. Energy is required to put phosphate groups back on. And here there are two acronyms I haven't told you about, AMP or ADP. But if you know that ATP is adenosine triphosphate, you would be correct in surmising that ADP is adenosine diphosphate, AMP is adenosine monophosphate. So if we go back to the structure of ATP, and we take off one bond, ATP becomes ADP. And if we take off two phosphate groups, leaving only one phosphate, then it becomes AMP, adenosine monophosphate. So a third consequence of the structure of ATP is that ATP and its phosphate groups that are ATP uses to transfer energy can be transferred to other molecules, energizing them and allowing them to participate in chemical reactions. ATP is like a battery. Here's a little equation. It shows ADP plus P plus energy goes to ATP. So if we add that energy, we can put that phosphate group onto adenosine diphosphate and make adenosine triphosphate. ATP is like the charged form of a battery. And it's very important that you note that this reaction goes both ways. It happens many, many times each day. And you must have a constant reservoir, a constant supply of ATP to power life. Once a living thing runs out of ATP and can no longer have an energetic input to keep itself organized, that's the cause of death. And a typical cell, and this is a bacterial cell, contains 5 million ATP at any moment. That sounds like a big supply, but it turns out it lasts for a very limited time. It lasts for only 2 seconds, and so that's not very much time. So you always have to be replenishing your ATP. A living thing must, you included, must always be replenishing the ATP to maintain life. Now, we talked a little bit about the branches of metabolism. Reactions that release energy were called catabolic reactions. Reactions that require energy are called anabolic reactions. And okay, if you release energy and you require energy, it makes a great deal of sense to link them together. And in fact, this little equation of ATP, ADP plus P to ATP, is the intermediary reaction that links these two together and allows cellular work to be done with the energy from catabolic reactions. And so that is the intermediary. And of course, this is given a name of reaction coupling. Reaction coupling is the use of energy released from catabolic reactions to power anabolic reactions. And reaction coupling is critical to the overall efficiency of life, to the efficiency of metabolism, and it allows, again, that energy from catabolic reactions to drive anabolic reactions. And the reason that reaction coupling is possible is because the same molecular intermediate, ATP, stores the energy from catabolic reactions and is used to drive anabolic reactions. You have a space in your notes, and you should draw this diagram. There are, in fact, 3 reactions here. You can see there's one reaction here. This is a catabolic reaction. The substrate is the reactants, and the product, of course, is a product. In the second reaction, it's the intermediate reaction. This is the familiar ADP plus P to ATP. And the third reaction is an anabolic reaction. The substrate's there and the product's there. What is interesting in the way that these reactions are illustrated here is that this red line traces the energy. So there is energy in the reactants or the substrate of the catabolic reaction, and as that catabolic reaction proceeds and bonds are broken, energy is released. That released energy is used to power the intermediate reaction of ADP plus P. Remember, that also requires plus energy, and the energy comes from the catabolic reaction, forming ATP. ATP is then used as the energy source for anabolic reactions, and of course those are energy requiring reactions. So ADP cleaves one of the phosphate groups, forming ADP plus phosphate, and releases that energy, and it's used to produce the products of the anabolic reaction. So you should draw this showing all three reactions. You don't have to use red, but you can use a wavy line to show where the energy goes or something like that. But reaction coupling, we're not going to learn specific examples with reactions and particular chemicals, but the general concept is a fairly important one for you to be aware of. And this will conclude this module.